That was a crazy movie because it was a great movie, but it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
You got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with.
As soon as he began to speak about it, you could feel it. There was something extraordinary about the film. It wasn't just a film. It was something else. It was powerful. It was intense. And from the beginning, it felt like there was resistance to it. You could sense the room change. The joking stopped. The energy tightened. Even Rogan, a man who's interviewed presidents, fighters, and whistleblowers, was genuinely shaken to the point where it seemed like he cried. Join us in this video as we explore the powerful truths Mel Gibson revealed on the Joe Rogan Show. Gibson's powerful account of the crucifixion. Gibson's mission was never simple. It was impossible from the start. The Passion of the Christ was never meant to be just another biblical epic. Gibson wanted it raw, unfiltered, almost uncomfortable in its honesty. He was chasing the truth. As he once explained, the heart of the film was this: we're all responsible. The sacrifice wasn't distant history. It was personal. So he immersed himself in the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, studying every verse about the final hours of Jesus' life. Every pause, every word, every detail. But he didn't stop there. He looked beyond them, drawing from other biblical writings and traditions to build something layered, something heavy. He wasn't just trying to show what happened. He wanted to show what it meant. Because in his view, there is no middle ground. If the resurrection didn't happen, then the entire story collapses. It's either the cornerstone of faith, or it's nothing at all. This wasn't going to be passive entertainment. It was meant to demand something from the audience: reflection, confrontation, a reckoning with ideas of faith, sacrifice, guilt, and redemption. And from the very first scene, you feel it. The Garden of Gethsemane. Night is closing in. Silence pressing down. Jesus kneels in prayer while Peter, James, and John, his closest companions, fall asleep. The contrast is stark. He is both fully divine and fully human, vulnerable, agonizing, the weight of humanity's sin bearing down so heavily that he sweats drops of blood. Then, from the darkness, comes the adversary, Satan moving through the shadows, whispering doubt. A serpent appears, and in a quiet but deliberate act, Jesus crushes its head beneath his heel, a direct echo of Genesis. A visual callback to the first promise that evil would not have the final word. From the opening minutes, the message is clear. This isn't just a story about suffering, it's a story about cosmic confrontation. And it was never going to be easy to watch. On Calvary, the serpent's head is crushed, authority stripped, power overturned. That's the image Gibson wanted burned into the audience's mind, not just as symbolism, but as a declaration. Every frame of the Passion of the Christ carries weight. The shadows aren't accidental. The silences aren't filler. Even the briefest lines of dialogue feel deliberate, layered with theological meaning. This isn't the kind of film you half-watch while reaching for popcorn. It asks something of you. It demands attention. It forces you to confront something bigger than comfort, bigger than entertainment. But while Gibson was constructing that vision on screen, he was fighting something off-screen. What was it? How much fight did Gibson have inside? Keep watching to find out. Mel Gibson's shocking exposition. During his conversation with Joe Rogan, Gibson hinted at what he saw as a pattern in Hollywood, a double standard. Stories rooted in certain religious traditions were often handled with care, nuance, and respect. But Christian narratives? According to Gibson, they were frequently met with skepticism, sometimes even quiet hostility. The feedback wasn't always loud, it was subtle, too serious, too old-fashioned, out of step with modern audiences. Projects were brushed aside before they could breathe, and Gibson felt it firsthand. Here was an Oscar-winning director with a proven track record, the kind studios usually chase. Yet when he brought this story forward, doors didn't swing open. They closed. Conversations cooled. Longtime collaborators stepped back. The message, whether spoken or not, seemed clear. This story was uncomfortable, and so was the man determined to tell it. For Gibson, this wasn't just another production. His Catholic upbringing made it personal. It was conviction, not just creativity. When he described the sequel, spanning from the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle, he admitted how ambitious it was. It would have been easier to pivot, to choose a safer script, a historical drama with less controversy, but walking away would have meant abandoning more than a project. It would have meant abandoning a mission. His faith wouldn't let him quit. It pushed him forward, even when it cost him comfort, credibility, and millions of his own dollars. When traditional funding disappeared, he reached into his own pocket. When studios backed away, he gathered a small team who believed in the vision as deeply as he did. People who weren't afraid of backlash, and out of that pressure, that isolation, that resistance, came something no one expected. The Passion of the Christ didn't collapse under controversy. It soared. It became one of the highest-grossing R-rated films in history. The very audience Hollywood claimed didn't exist showed up in massive numbers, quietly, consistently, powerfully. It proved something uncomfortable. Maybe people were hungry for bold, uncompromising stories after all. But during his conversation with Joe Rogan, the tone shifted again, darker this time. Because the struggle over the film wasn't the only battle Gibson was willing to talk about. He began speaking about the institution he grew up loving, the Catholic Church. And this wasn't easy ground for him. For someone raised in deep Catholic tradition, the church wasn't just theology. It was family, structure, history, something sacred. Yet he made it clear loyalty doesn't mean silence. And silence in the face of corruption isn't faith, it's complicity. Carefully but directly, he referenced disgraced figures like former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick and other high-ranking clergy who were later exposed for covering up or enabling abuse. Men entrusted with immense spiritual authority, men who failed that trust. Children were harmed. And instead of swift justice, there were transfers, quiet relocations, legal shields, institutional protection. Gibson didn't speak as an outsider throwing stones. He spoke as someone wounded by disappointment, someone who expected better from a church that teaches moral accountability. Was Gibson crossing a line? What made Joe Rogan cry? Keep watching to find out. What Gibson said that made Joe Rogan cry. Gibson didn't stop at that. He touched on his hopes for reform at the highest level, hoping that Pope Francis would usher in deeper transparency and real change, a turning point, a reckoning. But from his perspective, too much of the old machinery of self-preservation remained intact. For Gibson, the conflict wasn't about attacking faith. It was about defending it, separating belief from bureaucracy, conviction from corruption. And that's where the conversation grew heavier. Because challenging Hollywood is one thing, challenging your own house is another. Gibson said something that lingered long after the podcast ended. The church that began with radical teachings of love, sacrifice, and humility had, in many ways, hardened into a power structure. An institution is sometimes more focused on protecting itself than protecting the vulnerable. He described it as two churches existing at once, one striving, imperfectly but sincerely, to live out Christ's message, and another operating behind closed doors, entangled in politics, image control, and institutional survival. He pointed to unusual and controversial moments in church history. The 1958 papal conclave that reportedly produced both black and white smoke before a final decision, fueling decades of speculation. But what made his words land wasn't sensationalism, it was grief. He didn't sound like someone chasing a scandal, he sounded like someone mourning. There was disappointment in his voice, the ache of watching something sacred fall short of its own standards. He spoke about how the Vatican's status as a sovereign entity has historically complicated legal accountability. He referenced the broader abuse crisis that has shaken the Catholic Church globally. Cases where priests were reassigned instead of removed, where internal handling delayed justice, where victims carried trauma while institutions managed optics. Investigations in places like Illinois and other U.S. states revealed extensive records of clergy abuse allegations spanning decades, exposing systemic failures that allowed harm to continue. For Gibson, acknowledging that reality wasn't an act of rebellion, it was an act of conscience, and it came at a cost. Speaking openly about corruption within a faith community that shaped your identity can mean isolation, but to him, silence felt worse. This was the moment in the Rogan interview when the atmosphere shifted again. You could see it. Rogan, who has hosted world leaders, war veterans, and cultural lightning rods, seemed visibly moved. Because this wasn't Hollywood gossip. It wasn't a career promotion. It was a man wrestling in real time with faith, disappointment, loyalty, and truth. The weight of it felt real. The sincerity felt unfiltered. And whatever people think of Gibson, it was clear in that moment. Speaking that openly required a kind of courage that goes beyond cinema. It broke through Rogan's usual detachment. The analytical distance he keeps as a host? Gone. His eyes welled up. The room felt smaller somehow, quieter. But step back from the emotion and the battlefield shifts to the film itself. In many ways, that's when the real clash began. What in the movie led to the many challenges Gibson faced? What clapbacks did Gibson get from producing The Passion of the Christ? Let's see. Reactions surrounding Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. When the movie finally hit theaters, critics were sharply split, and that division only amplified the cultural storm surrounding it. Roger Ebert, one of the most influential film critics of his generation, gave it 4 out of 4 stars. That wasn't casual praise. Ebert was known for celebrating great films, but also for dissecting their weaknesses without hesitation. He called it the most violent and intense film he had ever seen. Yet he also admitted something personal. Despite being raised in a religious tradition, he had never fully grasped the depth of Christ's suffering until he experienced Gibson's portrayal. Other respected critics responded with similar seriousness. Richard Corliss acknowledged the film's sincerity and ambition. Armand White went even further, comparing Gibson's direction to Carl Theodor Dreyer, a filmmaker revered for his stark, spiritually intense cinema. These weren't lightweight endorsements. They came from critics who understood film history, theology and art, and the risks of grand religious storytelling. Even when they disagreed with elements of the movie, many recognized that something significant had been attempted. But praise wasn't the only reaction. Before the film even premiered, controversy was already building. A joint committee representing the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and the Anti-Defamation League reviewed the script and raised serious concerns. Their fear was specific and rooted in history, that certain depictions, particularly of Jewish religious authorities in the trial of Jesus, could unintentionally echo narratives that had fueled anti-Semitism for centuries. This wasn't a small debate about filmmaking choices. It touched centuries of pain, persecution, and theological misunderstanding. The battle lines weren't simple. They rarely are when faith, history, and cinema collide. The Catholic Church had formally rejected the idea of collective Jewish guilt for Christ's death during the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s. Many Protestant denominations followed that lead. So when concerns surfaced about Gibson's portrayal, they weren't minor objections. They were rooted in history, in centuries where certain interpretations had been twisted to justify hatred, persecution, even violence. The Joint Committee feared the film could unintentionally reopen wounds that decades of interfaith dialogue had tried to heal, and history gave weight to that fear. Gibson insisted his intention was different. He said the story pointed to humanity's shared responsibility, not the blame of any single ethnic or religious group. But intention and interpretation don't always land the same way, and that tension made the debate unavoidable. Scholars also noted creative additions that didn't appear in the biblical texts, like Judas being tormented by unsettling, almost demonic children. Critics questioned their historical basis. Gibson's answer was simple. This wasn't meant to be a documentary. It was an artistic rendering of spiritual realities. He was speaking in cinematic language, symbolism, metaphor, imagery, to explore guilt, despair, temptation, and spiritual conflict. In his view, film could communicate truths that literal retelling could not. But did his view stop the backlash? Did they even think his point of view was worth airing? Keep watching to find out. The surprising impact of Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. For some viewers, it was all of the above. For others, it blurred lines that shouldn't be blurred. The reactions were intense and deeply personal. Many described the film as spiritually transformative, an experience that deepened their faith or reshaped how they understood sacrifice. Others found it overwhelmingly violent or theologically troubling. Very few walked away indifferent, and that polarization only fueled its impact. People who might never have attended a religious film felt compelled to see it for themselves. Churches organized group screenings. Pastors built sermon series around it. News outlets dissected it frame by frame, debating its symbolism, its politics, its cultural consequences. In a film industry increasingly shaped by focus groups and market-tested formulas, stories designed to offend no one and disturb nothing. The Passion of the Christ felt almost defiant. It wasn't chasing consensus. It wasn't smoothing rough edges. It was conviction on screen. And the making of it? That story was anything but ordinary. Some involved lightning strikes, on-set injuries, and moments cast members later described as eerie or miraculous. Whether seen as a coincidence or providence, the production itself added another layer to the legend surrounding the film. By the time it left theaters, it had become more than a movie. It was an event. The production itself began to take on an almost mythic quality. For some on set, the boundary between filmmaking and something deeper felt thin, uncomfortably thin. Jim Caviezel, cast as Jesus, didn't just portray suffering. He endured it. The cross he carried reportedly weighed around 30 pounds, and during one take it caused his shoulder to dislocate. In the scourging scene, he was accidentally struck for real, once hard enough to knock the wind out of him, another time tearing skin and drawing blood. The exhaustion, the strain, the visible agony on screen weren't entirely performance. They were physical reality. And that authenticity gave the film a rawness no special effect could manufacture. Then there were the lightning strikes. Assistant director Jan Michelini was reportedly struck by lightning during filming. Caviezel himself later said he was hit while shooting the crucifixion scene and survived. In biblical imagery, lightning often symbolizes divine power or judgment. On set, those incidents left people shaken. Coincidence? Freak weather? Or something that simply felt symbolic because of the story being told? No one could say for certain. But it intensified the atmosphere. The sense that something unusual surrounded the project only deepened as filming continued. When Gibson added a sweeping musical score, later nominated for major awards, it amplified the emotional gravity of the film. The sound didn't soften the brutality. It elevated the spiritual undertones, turning suffering into something almost liturgical. Transformations weren't limited to physical injuries. Luca Lionello, who portrayed Judas Iscariot, has said that exploring betrayal and despair so intensely affected him deeply on a personal level. Maya Morgenstern, who played Mary, was quietly pregnant during filming, an image many later reflected on symbolically, given the story's themes of death giving way to life. There were also stories, harder to verify, but widely shared among those involved, of people claiming emotional or even physical healing connected to the production. A child with severe epilepsy reportedly went a period without seizures. Others spoke of renewed faith, restored hope, and unexpected peace. Whether one interprets those accounts as divine intervention, coincidence, or the psychological power of belief, they added to the growing sense that this was more than a standard film set. For the cast and crew, it began to feel like participation in something larger than cinema. So why does it feel out of character for Joe Rogan to have cried at these revelations? What details about Joe Rogan's life make it hard to believe that he'd break down on live TV? Let's see. Why Joe Rogan's tears came as a surprise. Joseph James Rogan Jr., born August 11, 1967, is an American podcaster, comedian, UFC color commentator, actor, and former television host. He is best known for hosting The Joe Rogan Experience, one of the world's most popular podcasts, which has been the most streamed podcast on Spotify since 2020. Born in Newark, New Jersey, Rogan began his career in comedy in 1988 in Boston. He moved to Los Angeles in 1994, signing a developmental deal with Disney and appearing on shows like Hardball and News Radio. In 1997, he started working with the UFC as an interviewer and color commentator. Rogan released his first comedy special, I'm Gonna Be Dead Someday, in 2000 and hosted the game show Fear Factor from 2001 to 2006. After leaving Fear Factor, he focused on stand-up and additional comedy specials. In 2009, he launched The Joe Rogan Experience, which quickly became a global phenomenon. By 2015, it was one of the most popular podcasts worldwide, regularly receiving millions of plays per episode. Spotify acquired exclusive distribution rights in 2020 for $200 million, and in 2024, Rogan renewed the deal for an estimated $250 million, though he will no longer be exclusive to Spotify. Rogan has publicly supported same-sex marriage, recreational substance legalization, universal health care, universal basic income, firearm rights, and free speech, while opposing cancel culture and military adventurism. He has faced criticism for promoting conspiracy theories, COVID-19 misinformation, and hosting guests who spread pseudoscience. Politically, he previously endorsed Ron Paul in 2012 and Bernie Sanders in 2020, supported Donald Trump in 2024, and later criticized some of Trump's policies. What do you think about the powerful truths Mel Gibson just revealed about the Passion of the Christ that everyone previously missed? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for joining us to rediscover these truths from Mel Gibson himself. We hope you found this video both insightful and interesting. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the next video on your screen to explore more interesting celebrity stories. See you there.